Hey guys, before we get started on this video, there was a patch update to Mauga, and I recorded this video before that patch where he did get nerfed pretty severely. Though I think he's still going to kind of remain in the same place in terms of power. He'll be a lot worse, especially against squishies, but it's going to further emphasize my point about his playstyle down the line. So, yeah, I didn't want to make too many major edits to this video because I don't think that this patch changes too much, but to give them credit, they did nerf the character, who was definitely way too OP previously. So yeah, enjoy the video. It's finally time to start talking about Mauga. Mauga, I might say his name wrong throughout this video. I apologize. Correct me down in the comments on the correct pronunciation, but I wanted to give some time for, one, the developers to actually patch out the character and balance him a little bit better from what it was in December, because it wasn't really, it very clear it wasn't ready. It was almost there, but it wasn't ready yet. So we wanted to give some time. He's gotten that time. Let's talk about the pros and cons and what I believe to be Mauga's biggest problem and what it means for the game. Now, this is the second tank that we've seen come out post Overwatch 2, and he's had similar things happen to him that happened to Ramattra that we may forget about. But let's talk about the design. I think he's a cool character. I think they did a lot of good things with him. So let's go ahead and break it down. The good, the bad, the ugly. Let's take a look. Let's start out by going through his basics of the kit, right? He has two miniguns. The one on the left can ignite players if you hit them with a certain amount of shots in a row. I think it's about 8 is usually that number. And the gun on the right will permanently crit anybody who's on fire. So your goal is to use the left gun from medium to long range to mark a target. The easiest one generally is the tank. Set them on fire and then use the right gun to be permanently critting them and building shields. This crit damage works on anything. It can work on a turret, it can work on blocking targets, it works on targets that you can't usually headshot. So it's the first time in the game that you've seen actual crit mechanics change throughout the game, and I found that to be very, very interesting. It gave some nuance to the dual miniguns, and actually makes you think about when you want to use them, which would be a big concern for people who are just saying, okay, well, it's just miniguns, you just sit there and shoot. So they did add a little bit of depth to it like that, and I think it is an interesting way to actually play, and you see how Mauga plays. Now, moving on to his abilities, right? Obviously, you have the self-heal ability, which is definitely his best ability. I don't think his charge is that good. I think it's just useful to get in and out of tough situations and navigate the map. The real strong ability is definitely his E, or his ability to heal from damage he deals, and giving that same ability to allies as well. Generally, this ability is best used on the tank. We'll talk a little bit about Mauga's gameplay loop after we cover his abilities, but it's very, very one-dimensional in what's actually effective and the proper way to play the character, and it kind of ends up in a similar situation to Ramattra's issue, where you're like, oh, he has this big nemesis form where you want to go pummel people, except it turned out the actual proper way to play him was to probably just sit there and block until you absorb the brunt of the damage, and then maybe you can go in a little bit. So Mauga does something very similar with that, where you really want to save your E for when the big incoming damage comes in, dodging anti-nades, and just kind of, well, shooting at their tank. And right now, he's so strong that he simply overwhelms every single tank in the game, which is why I kind of joked and called it the Battle Pass patch. This is not another Life Weaver. He just simply overwhelms almost every tank in the game, and you'll see the Ramattra that I'm going up against, it even pierces straight through his block with the crit mechanic, right? You can actually out-damage the Mauga, or out-damage the Ramattra, and anything that's not a Mauga mirror, by just spamming your dual machine guns at it. And it works, right? And that self-heal ability that lets you heal whilst doing that is really the de facto thing that kind of leads the charge on that. So it's a really strong ability. It's an interesting mechanic, but he's kind of just a stat monster with it, if you will. Moving on to his charge, you can kind of finish off fights with the charge and get in big and get a big slam. It's not an initiation tool. It's more so useful for getting spacing, setting up your ultimate cage fight, or just chasing down a kill or repositioning. It's definitely not an engage tool unless you've already started winning the fight with other means, because again, he's really easy to discord, he's really easy to nade, you can hit him with cooldowns pretty easily, so if you just go straight in, you will die. 9 times out of 10, you will straight up die. So you can't just run it straight down mid. It's more so like using to set up, get to corners, to hold. He actually plays very similarly to how Ramattra played, which is a big point I want to bring up about playing tank in Overwatch 2. You don't really have too many options, and it's incredibly one-dimensional in the 5v5 roll lock format. But before we get into his playstyle and his gameplay loop in particular, let's talk about his ultimate cage fight, which is actually super, super interesting. Cage fight is a pretty good ult. Infinite ammo in it is really, really good. You generally want to use it to either set up your team's ultimates or just trap people in bad positioning or secure 1 or 2 kills. That's what I found to be the most useful with it after playing a couple hours of Mauga and really seeing what he excels at. Getting in there with another tank is important, but the most important thing is when you're actually in there, you absolutely must have your E ability ready. If you don't have your heal from damage ability up and you ult, you're not going to get value, right? You need to make sure that you actually have that healing ability up, because Anas will just nade you and you will die. You don't have the firepower on your own to pierce through a lot of abilities just in a couple seconds, and that healing ability is what allows you to stay up and active in the fight. You must have it ready or be nanoed or something like that. Now, moving on to Mauga's gameplay loop and what's actually good for him. He's very controlled by supports. There's no if, and, or buts around it. Depending on what supports you get will directly impact how much value you have, regardless of how good you are at the character. The Mauga mirrors are just frankly incredibly one-dimensional, and I'll be honest, it's a very boring gameplay loop because you literally are just sitting there and you're just spamming. It's like the fighter. It's like a noob playing a fighter game. Like you're just mashing every button, right? At the other tank. Shooting the tank is really just the most viable strategy for him. If you stop shooting the tank, you don't generate shields and you just get obliterated. So if their tank's alive and he's shooting you, especially as a Mauga and a Mauga mirror, you're going to lose 10 times out of 10. So in terms of the depth of the actual gameplay loop, I'm going to give it like a C-. I'll be honest with you. I think Junker Queen really was the first tank that they gave like a big successful launch to with her abilities and her skill shots. For me, how Ramaktra ended up being viable and how now Mauga is kind of doing the same thing. There's not a whole lot of depth to how to play the characters. And now I really love these Ram buffs. I think Ram's a really, really fun character. And I tweeted this the other day. I haven't had as much fun playing Overwatch 2 than I did when I actually queued Ramaktra in open queue. Let me tell you, with these Ram buffs, so much fun, truly. But without a second tank, Mauga really just is at the mercy of his support line, because if they pick the Anakiri and you have Mercy Weaver, well, it's going to be really hard for you to win, right? It's just like your experience is very much so out of your control, and you're probably going to have to swap because there's no way for him to stop the anti-nades, really. It's very easy for him to get discorded, right? You have to be incredibly careful, which does not allow for a hyper-aggressive play tank style that you could see from a Zarya. You could see from a Doomfist, if you will. You could see from a lot of different characters, or even a Junker Queen in some scenarios. It's very support dependent, and what your supports put into you really dictates. It's probably the most important thing if you want to play Mauga, right? Because otherwise, you just don't have the sustain on your own. You'll just get absolutely eviscerated. It doesn't really matter how good you are at the character, how good the people you're playing against. You got to get the right setup. And this is a common theme, right, that you've seen with 2 of the last 3 tanks that have come out in the game in Overwatch 2 in the 5v5 roll-out format, is that's just kind of how they have to play. They're super, super support dependent. And while Ramaktra has his block, you know, we're going to have to see how Mauga plays. And the most effective way from multiple pro players I've talked to is just to sit there and spam at the other tank, which I don't think to have that much depth. Now, and what I want people to understand, too, when I talk about this, you know, he's not a poorly designed hero, really. I mean, he has overwhelming stats right now because they want him to be in the Battle Pass. They want him to be good because he's the new hero. But, you know, it's not a hero design issue. And I find it very interesting that this is now the second tank that's come out post Overwatch 2's launch that's going to have this same problem, if you will, with a lack of depth into how his gameplay loop feels. And if you guys sit down and you play him and you watch how I'm playing him, it's kind of the same thing as the best way to play the character. And I really think that's a lot of wasted potential for how cool and unique his ultimate is, how his minigun mechanic works, for how spacing can work. And the reality is, with solo tank and his heal ability being his best ability, and the best way to heal is by shooting the other tank, and this is why you see you've never seen tanks put out this much damage per 10 in Overwatch ever, right, than Mauga mirrors, right? So it's kind of disappointing to see. I feel like his potential for how he can play is certainly not reached in this format, and no matter how much they rebalance the character, that's just going to be what really happens there. They're much more limited in the playstyles they offer in the 5v5 roll-out format. That being said, he overwhelms every other tank right now. I think he's absolutely an S tier character. He just stat monsters through every other tank. In most situations, he might not get played over Sigma on Circuit Royale or Havana, but on other maps, I mean, he powers through Ramattra, he powers through Reinhardt, he powers through Winston, he powers through Roadhog, right? It is just, he powers through Orisa, because he can crit heroes that previously had crit immunity. Right? With Ramattra block, you couldn't crit him. With Orisa Fortify, you couldn't crit him. With, what's another example? Reinhardt Shield, his miniguns rip through it. The same with Winston's, right? So this is the first time you've seen a tank really be able to do that. Even with Roadhog's damage mitigation, the fact that he's going to be getting permanently crit almost negates Take a Breather altogether. So the developers, obviously we hadn't seen the Mauga buffs previously when they talked about that first patch, saying that he hard countered Hog. He now does, right? So for a couple weeks, at least Roadhog's going to be gone. Right now, again, and this is what you're seeing in kind of in 5v5 Rollock in Overwatch 2's model, you know, the new hero is simply going to outclass the rest of the characters in strength, but the play styles aren't actually getting diverse and better. So it's not nearly as much about how you play, it's just more so what you pick. And again, I've talked about this with Overwatch 2 a lot. I don't think that's a healthier way for the game, but that's what 5v5 Rollock with this Battle Pass monetization system does. And it's just, he's going to be the flavor of the month when he comes out. And unfortunately, you aren't seeing those diverse playstyles come along as well. It's much more limited. It's a much lower skill ceiling. And frankly, I'd say even a lower skill floor. But it's good for making money. And if you're a flat player, you can go pick him right now. If you buy the Battle Pass and you buy the character, and you can probably dominate through players and climb some ranks. That's just kind of what Overwatch 2's model is. And so, yeah, I think that's the biggest problem with Mauga, is that this format doesn't allow him to actually expand on what's good in his play styles. I played him a bit in open queue quick play, and he was interesting. It was definitely different, way more ways to set up, engage, use your ultimate. And I thought that was a lot of fun. But like 5v5, the Rollock format is not going to bring that potential out of him. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on Mauga. I'm going to rate the hero a 7 out of 10. And it would be much higher of a rating if there was an actual game format where his skill ceiling come out. Like, I, as a player who plays at the skill ceiling, like to see higher skill ceilings that make you think, make you try to do better setups, play the game differently, all kinds of things like that, right? And I just don't think that it's possible, regardless of how you balance the hero at this point, to actually achieve that gameplay loop of a lot of depth. And you guys saw the same thing happen with Ramattra. I know you all saw the clip of Emong GG sitting there blocking all day. Like, it was a block mirror. Everyone's like, oh, it's gonna go in and pummel. And then actually the meta was to sit there and block, right? Because that's how you have to play tank in this game. So I don't think the problem is with Mauga. I think it's just with how tank flows in the game, and the most optimal way to play tank in 5v5 is just not really suited for Mauga, a hero that, you know, is all about those spam and those guns and get aggressive and brawl. But I think he's a well-designed, he's like a well-modeled character. He looks cool. They made the miniguns mechanics actually interesting, and I don't think it's a balance issue. I think he'll get nerfed and tuned, and then maybe he'll disappear for a year like Ramattra, because there's only that one tank spot they're competing for, and we'll see. But right now, he overwhelms anything. So what do you guys think about Mauga? That's my big pros and cons. I like the minigun mechanic. I like the heal mechanic. I love his ultimate. I think it's super, super cool in concept and can be a great zoning ultimate. And great at chasing down kills, but I think his gameplay loop is the most boring they've ever had for a tank. Sit there and just spam and shoot is just, there's no depth to that, there's no skill to that. It's just kind of spammy, overwhelmed by the Battle Pass. So this is the Battle Pass patch. What do you guys think? Let me know down in the description, comments. But either way, talk to y'all later. Take care. Peace out.